Hello everyone, how are you? I hope you are doing good. So today we are going to start with a new lesson which is in the earliest cities. So till now we have discussed a lot about what were the early civilizations, the early humans, they decided to settle down in areas. So when they started to settle down, these colonies, they took a shape of earliest cities. So what are we going to learn in these chapters? Have a look. So the story of Harappa. What was Harappa, how was it formed, etc. Then we are going to learn about what was special about these cities. Of course, these cities were made and they were developed with time. So what were the key features of these cities? Houses, drains and streets. What was the drainage system? How were the streets and houses in these cities? We'll have a look at that. Then we will see what was the early life and the new crafts that developed and flourished in these cities. In search of raw material, of course, if there were crafts and craftsmen, there was a need for raw material. So where did these craftsmen and these early humans, they found the raw material for making things? Food for people in the city. So of course, food is very important for survival. Where did and what kind of food did the early humans who were living in these cities used to have? A closer look on Harappan towns in Gujarat. So we have the proofs and evidences of these long lost Harappan towns and civilization in the state of Gujarat. So we'll have a look at it. The mystery of the end. So we will see how gradually it ended. So to begin with the chapter, let's have a look at the story of Jaspal and Harpreet. Jaspal and Harpreet are two young boys who were playing cricket outside their house. Soon, while playing, they observed that there were people who were admiring a dilapidated house, a destructed and broken down house, and the children were calling it a haunted house. So I am sure in your colonies also there must be one or two houses which are not in good shape, and the children who play there, they call it haunted house. But what were the discussion that they had? They were admiring the architecture that the house was built on. So have you seen the fine wood carvings? There were fine wood carvings on that house. So they wondered that whether they should write a letter to the ministry, to the chief minister, in order to conserve this house, to preserve the architectural beauty that the house maintained even at that time. They wondered, why would anybody run down this house, and where did this beautiful architecture and intricate designs come from? How were they developed? Who made them? Let's have a look. So the story of Harappa. Harappa, I am sure you must have heard this word. There are a lot of movies also like Mohenjo-daro made on this civilization. So as we discussed in the previous chapters, that the early humans, they soon began hunting and gathering. So they started to settle down in areas with close proximity to water and where food was available. They built shelter in caves, etc. So later on, gradually as this process developed, this took a form of early cities and civilizations were formed. What is a civilization? Civilization is nothing but where a people live. So the early humans, they developed their own civilization. Civilization is a word which refers to as the building of houses, building of businesses, trades, mode of lifestyle, food, etc. So one such early civilization in the Indian subcontinent was the Indian Valley civilization or Harappa civilization. So how do we know about this Harappa civilization? In 1856, there was a railway line construction going on in the state of Punjab. So while developing that railway line, the railway engineer found a mound of bricks. So he observed that these bricks, they were not belonging to that era. They were not the same as the bricks that were used in that era. They were quite old, yet strong. So these bricks obtained from the site was used in railway construction. So these bricks, they gave us the proof and evidence that there was a civilization much before the kingdoms were set up. Many buildings were completely destroyed, but yet these bricks still existed. They were baked, and this is the reason that they survived so many years. So then archaeologists found the site and realized that this was one of the oldest continents and where cities were established in the early era in the Indian subcontinent. So at those sites, similar buildings and other things were found. So these were described as Harappan. What does Harappan means? Belonging to the Harappa civilization or Indus Valley civilization. These cities developed about 4700 years ago. So let's discuss about it more. So here in this map you can see the early continent known as the Harappan civilization. So this was the area where this continent was developed. So we discussed that the Harappan civilization or the Indian Valley civilization was one of the earliest continents that was settled. What was so special about these cities? Many of these cities were divided into 2 or more parts. So in the same city there were 2 parts. One was the western part, which was built in a higher plateau and was smaller in size, and the other was the eastern part, which was larger but lower. Okay, so when the land, if you compare the land, there was a western part which was much higher, and then there was the eastern part which was much lower but larger. So these higher parts, these western parts were known as citadel. A lot of baths were formed here, and the lower town was where the residence of the people were established. So walls of baked bricks were built around each other. These bricks were laid in an interlocking pattern, and that made the walls strong. So in the civilization, how were walls made? Walls were made by baked bricks. As in today's time, our houses, they are made by bricks and cement, isn't it? At that time also, people used to use baked bricks, and they were set in the pattern of interlocking, as in one was here, so other one was there. They were interlocked with each other to give the strength to the walls. Now, town planning. Since the early human found a way to make bricks and to build walls, town planning became easier for them. Each part was surrounded by a wall of baked bricks, as we discussed. The western part, known as the citadel, as well as the lower part, they both were surrounded by walls of bricks. The main street were wide and straight, and they cut each other at right angles. So the streets, they were at the right angle. They were very wide and large, and they were at the cross at each other. Fire burnt bricks were used for paving and streets. So how were the streets and roads formed? Fire burnt bricks, as you can see, if you go to an old monument, there are bricks. The flooring is quite different from the tar floor and the tar roads that are made today. So these bricks, they were made to use the floor and streets. Every street had its brick lined drainage channel. So in this time, the drainage is underground. Everything, the sewage flows under the city, isn't it? But in the earlier times, there were drainage channels along with the streets. So there were baked bricks were used in order to create drainage in which the waste could flow. So it was connected to the house drains. So these drainage channels, the main drainage channels in the streets, were connected with house drains so that the waste material from the houses could flow freely in these long drainage pipes and get out of the city. Drains were properly covered. So in order to avoid the spread of disease or any kind of foul smell, these drain lines were covered properly. So the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro. I am sure you must have heard of Mohenjo-daro. There was also a movie named on that. So what was Mohenjo-daro? Mohenjo-daro was one such early city which was based in the Indus Valley civilization. There was a very famous great bath, a very big bath which was built over there. So it was constructed on a citadel. Earlier we discussed what is a citadel. That is a western part of the city which is located higher than the residential area. So it is measured in a different way at that time. It comprises of a huge tank. There was a huge tank to store water. Since it's a bath, it was a public bath where people used to come and take bath and sit there and meet people. So it comprised of a huge tank to serve and store water which would available for everybody to use. It had some rooms probably used for changing, and they were surrounded by different tanks. There was a hole at the end of the bath which was used to drain water. Since it was a very large bath, so there was a requirement for a big hole to drain out the foul water. Apart from that, the floor of the tank has 5 layers of brick so that the water could not seep away from it. There were layers of bricks which would ensure that the water remained in that bath. Since we already discussed that the wall of these great bath and the flooring of this great bath, they were covered with tar so that the water could not seep away from it and it would be stored in that great bath. So other cities such as Kalibangan and Lothal had fire altars. Since Mohenjo-daro had a very big public bath, cities like Kalibangan and Lothal, they had fire altars where fire would be produced, where sacrifices may have been produced. So these fire altars, they were used to perform sacrifices at the times of battles, wars, etc. Some cities like Mohenjo-daro in Harappa and Lothal had elaborate storied houses. So of course, apart from these things, there were also houses that were built at that time, because it is essential for people to settle in. So these houses in the early era, in the Indus Valley civilization, they were multi-storied. It was not only one floor, there were several stories, several floors in these houses. So let's find out about more. Repeat. So let's find out more about these houses. So houses were of different shapes and sizes. Some were long, some were small, some were very big and elaborate, whereas some were quite simple. There were 1 or 2 story high, and rooms are built around a courtyard. So if you go in villages, you will see that there is an open courtyard in houses and the rooms are built around it. It is open from the middle. So this was the structure of the Harappan houses as well. They were built on raised platforms as protection against flood. So in the early times, there were no proper drainage systems to protect against flood. So hence these houses, they were built on a proper platform so that the flood could not take away the house. They had wells and bathrooms to ensure proper supply of water. Since we already discussed in the early chapters that water supply was another key essential which was required by the early humans, wells were built so that the people living in these houses could get and have a qualitative water supply. There were few windows but enough doors. So in these houses, there were not enough windows but enough doors in order to enter and exit. So the most remarkable building at the Harappan civilization was known as the Great Granary. Do you know what is a granary? We have granaries even in nowadays. Granaries are warehouses. These are buildings where we store our food grains and food supplies. So I am sure in that time also, the Harappan people, the people living in the Indus Valley civilization, they used to store their food grains and food items in order to use them in the future.